Okay, we are now recording. Um, so, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the third of our series, Cultivating a Caring Soul. This is the last part of our series, and we're ending on such a high note. It is my pleasure to introduce Dale Atkins to you. Dale is a licensed psychologist with more than 40 years of experience as a relationship expert focusing on families, wellness, managing stress, and living a balanced, meaningful life. She's the author of 7 books and many chapters, articles, and journals for popular and professional audiences. Dale is a featured speaker who lectures and leads seminars worldwide. She's appeared regularly on NBC's Today and CNN. Dale has a private psychology practice in New York City and has been a member of and advisor to several nonprofit boards, including Jumpstart for Young Children, from which she recently retired after serving 22 years since its founding. Wow, Dale, that is really impressive. She has 2 children and 6 grandchildren and lives in Connecticut. Hooray! Let's hear it for Connecticut. Anyway, oh, hang on. There's someone else waiting to come in, so I don't want her to miss anything. Welcome, Heidi. Anyway, Dale, it's an
Yes.
amazing. You have a very impressive bio, and we are so thankful to you for coming today to speak to us about the book you wrote, The Kindness Advantage: Cultivating Compassionate and Connected Children. So, with every author, one of my first questions is what inspired you and Amanda Salzauer, your co author, to write this book?
Well, thank you, Sharon, and thank you to everyone in the group who's here tonight. I'm really delighted to talk with you about our book. And yes, Amanda Salzauer and I were inspired to write this book from a series of talks, actually, that I had been giving years before the idea of this book. And I was talking about raising charitable children and what does it take to raise charitable children. And my niece, who happens to be my co-author, is a woman who was at the time raising what I perceived as 3 very charitable children. And I wanted to interview her because I was interviewing people about their experiences of raising kids. And the long and the short of it is we decided to write the book together, and it evolved into a book about kindness because we found that there were several characteristics and qualities in people who were charitable. And we looked at these as what we then referred to as the fundamentals of kindness. So we were inspired to write it because we were starting with what does it take to raise a charitable child? And then we were noticing that there was so much bullying going on and there was so much disrespect. And we each had a practice. She's a social worker, I'm a psychologist. And there were families that we were working with, and then families that we knew whose children seemed relatively disengaged with what was going on in the world and in their communities. And we really wanted to explore this. So once we really put our heads together, we said, well, I think we need to write a book about kindness. And let's see where that leads us as far as charity and philanthropy. So that's really what inspired us.
Well, that is amazing. You mentioned that you came to think of this as the fundamentals of kindness. And I'm wondering
Yes.
if you could walk us through what those fundamentals are.
Oh, sure. We started out with 26 of them because
Yeah,
this was
amazing.
originally supposed to be the ABCs of kindness. And then we said that was a little bit too much. And we were able to really pull them together. And we started off, these really aren't in any order of importance, they're just in alphabetical order. And the first is acceptance. What we really examined were these qualities in people who seemed to be charitable. And the first was acceptance of themselves and acceptance of others as others are, and not trying to change anybody, but just really trying to look at a situation, accept it, or a person, accept that person with respect and with paying attention to them, and with really understanding that we needed to communicate in a way that was respectful and really caring for this person or this organization or whatever it was. So the first is acceptance. The second one is commitment. We noticed that people who were charitable were quite committed to something that really spoke to them, and that they were not only devoted to, but really focused in the way that they became engaged. And the third was connection. We felt that these people were not only connected to others, but connected to the cause or to a desire to be kind. They knew that connection was what makes us all human. You know, we're social beings and we are to be connected. So we looked at that as one of the fundamentals of kindness, as we did empathy. The empathy, the ability and the desire to see what it's like to try and experience someone else's experience. What is their feeling? What is their cognitive response to something? We can't really experience someone else's life, but we could try to put our own experience aside and step in their shoes, if you were. So that's the empathy part. And then we would look at giving, because so many people who are charitable just thought about giving. What can they give? How can they give? Can they give money? Can they give time? Can they give of their talent? Can they give? How do they give of themselves? And then we were noticing, as this was evolving, that people who gave of themselves and really wanted to be connected and were committed to being connected seemed to be changed in the process of their giving their charity. So then we went to interest, and we noticed that these people have an interest or many interests, but they're interested in the world. They're interested in learning more. They're interested in expanding their horizons. And then we noticed that these people, many of them, were very committed to nurturing another person. They had nurturing spirits. They often nurtured themselves, which is important. And we'll talk about that later, about taking care of oneself. If you're trying to take care of someone else in some way or wanting to be kind. So how did they nurture their community, themselves, their families? And then we noticed that these people had rather keen observation skills. They watched, they listened, they paid attention. And it wasn't about them. It was about what was in front of them. Another quality, another fundamental we thought was important was that these people also asked questions. They weren't satisfied with what was. They said, how could this be different? Why is this way? What can we do to make it change, to make it better? And they asked questions also of people. They were interested, again, curious. And then the last fundamental, which again, these aren't in any order other than alphabetical, is be yourself. So who are we? How can we really give our authentic selves to the role that we are going to play in being charitable and being responsive? So these were the fundamentals. And what we did was we really examined them and tried to put them in the context that people could say, yeah, I'm a little bit of this, I'm a lot of that, or gee, I think I need to develop that a little more. Because what happens when we're kind is we really change. When we do acts of kindness, actually our brains change. And we can talk about that a little later if you wish. But when we talk about kindness and we talk about the fundamentals of kindness, I think what we really need to remember is that when we do good deeds, they become part of our nature. They really become the way we look at the world. And so, kindness becomes the path that we walk. And so that's what we consider the fundamentals, but they're certainly not set in stone. They just guided us as we were writing the book.
I think it's an excellent structure to work from, and to also, to give a sort of an outline to our conversation this evening. In chapter 2 of your book, you start with a quote, and it says, "We are all born with an innate capacity for language, but the expression for language requires that we be raised in a linguistic community. And similarly, for kindness and compassion, we are all born with these seeds, but it requires that they be nurtured. If they're not nurtured, they will atrophy." So,
Yes.
two questions. One, like language, is it easier to learn kindness at an early age rather than later on in life, where so many of us might struggle to learn another language? And I've also heard something called a love language. Like when you're growing in your book, you ask, when you were growing up, how did people in your family show that they cared about each other? And I've heard that kind of thing described as a love language. So if you grew up in a household where your love was expressed by buying presents, can you adapt to a different love language later in life? I mean, let's say your future spouse grew up with speaking a different language. Are you ever going to adapt to that other language? So, keeping those two language questions in mind, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I actually love the way you paired it with, you know, our questions are, how did people express kindness? How did they show kindness? Who was kind to you? Who do you remember as being kind? And what kind acts do you feel comfortable doing with the language? Because yes, the first answer that I want to offer to the question of, is it better to learn it when you're younger? Yes. And again, because as I said before, it becomes part of us. It becomes part of the way we walk through the world when we look through a lens of kindness. And Amanda and I, and several scientists, believe that we are born with the capacity to be kind, to be even altruistic. We see examples, and we cite studies in the book of very, very young children, just months old, who respond in a way that lets us believe that they are having the roots and the seeds of compassion. So we want to nurture this. Instead of teach kindness, which we will do later on, we want to nurture the kindness that's within us so that, as Dr. Richie Davidson says, this muscle, this kindness muscle, doesn't atrophy. Because without exercise, it will atrophy. But when exercised, when acknowledged, it will blossom. So, yes, we have the seeds for this as with language, and we have to be in a rich linguistic environment of kindness. So, we need to be the recipients of kindness, and we need to be the purveyors of kindness. So that the question you ask about, if you're brought up with the language of someone buying presents and you don't want presents, your background was people shared their time, they shared, and not that these are mutually exclusive, but I think the dichotomy is, this person shows his or her love by buying gifts. This person believes they are loved when someone spends time with them, listens to them, shows respect. Yes, there can be gifts, but if you believe that one is a demonstration of kindness and the other is not, or one is a demonstration of love and the other is not, then you will probably hit some obstacles in those relationships. I think what's important also is how we give. If we give presents, how do we give those presents? Do we give a present that we would like to receive? Or do we give a present that we know is the perfect present for that person? Which the message that's conveyed is, oh, you remembered when I said I liked owls, or you remembered when I said my favorite color was turquoise, and you searched for something that reminded you of me. So I think it's not black and white, but I do believe that we must nurture this. And, when we look at what we nurture in our children, particularly as they get older, we often say, of course, I want my child to be kind. But how do we nurture their kindness? How do we let them know that we appreciate, that we notice, and that we appreciate that they took care of the puppy, that they picked up their friend's sweatshirt when it dropped out of their pack, that they held the door open for someone spontaneously, that they cleared their plate and brought their plate to the dish, to the sink. Are we paying attention to those things and saying, wow, that was really so sweet of you. That was so kind of you. I know that your friend was delighted to know that he didn't drop his, that he didn't lose his sweatshirt. Because so much of what we say upon seeing kids after they come home from school is, how was your math test? How did you do? How was the tryouts? What is your grade? And so the message is often to children, it may not be our intention. What's important to me is that you really make the grade, that you really are competitive in school, that you are, what was your team score? How is your artistic project? That those seem to resonate with kids, that's really more important than, did you take time to listen to a friend who might be having a difficult time? Let's make a card for your friend whose mother's sick. So we have to, as the people who are nurturing the kindness, we have to stop and reflect and not only review the language that we were raised with, but what is the language we want to raise our children with? Does that address your question?
Oh, absolutely. It's really,
Okay.
you make some very important points. It's all a question of making sure if I take what you're saying, to make sure that we reinforce in our kids that which we really want to see, and take a moment to reflect and to make sure that what we are putting out there is what we want our kids to take in. Your point about the first thing you ask, well, how was the math test? I know we've all done it, but maybe the first thing
Because
we
it's
should ask,
important.
it
It's
is
important,
important.
Sharon. But I think what we're trying to ask people to think about is, how are you demonstrating to your children what your core values are? And if your core values in your family are about kindness and respect and attention and nurturing and listening, and really wondering how your kids are doing in their social world, right? Of engaging with people from a perspective of kindness and interest, then we have to ask them questions, and we have to role model for them also. We have to say, I know that we're supposed to eat now, but my friend has a problem and I really want to give her attention. So we're going to eat in 10 minutes, right? I need to spend this time with her now. This is important. And that we share why we make the decisions that we make. I want to work in this charity because this is important to me, because this charity raises money for research in this particular disease, and that's what got grandma, right? And that's why this is important to me. And so we share why we do what we do. And as soon as kids are old enough, and I think they're old enough when they can be strapped in in front of you, and if you're going to be helping to serve at a soup kitchen, your baby's right there, right? Or your children are right near you, helping to put the napkins out on the table. Because doing things as a family that show what's important to you, this is how children learn about kindness, and this is how they see it in action. Because again, you can talk about it, you can think about it, but you have to feel it. And children need to feel that, to have that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what transforms people. It's that actual engagement with another person or an animal or a cleanup place or a mountain. That's where the transformation happens. That's where the habit starts. And that's where the muscle is really strong.
Right. I love that image you were saying of, having you have kid in the front pack. I mean, at a very early age, um, children take in, they're little sponges. They pretty much take in everything that's around them. Um, and it's a wonderful thought in
May I
terms of,
interrupt for a moment?
sure.
They not only get the experience, but they also pick up what's going on in their parents and or who's ever on the other end of that pack, because what's happening to the person who is actually engaged in that act of kindness is their brains are changing. They're having a release of endorphins, serotonin, the love hormone, oxytocin. These are actually being released in the brains of the people who are doing the kind act and in the people receiving the kind act and in the people watching them. There's something called moral elation. And so when we are doing this, we are experiencing this, and those around us are also, it's called kindness contagion. They're also exposed to that. So there's really good science to support doing things with your children, doing things for your children, having your children watch you, and then explaining it and going through it, because they will also pick up what you're experiencing.
Right, and really learn empathy.
Yes.
It's on, again, on to quote from your book on page 35, you say empathy is the accurate understanding of another person's internal experience. It has nothing to do with agreeing or disagreeing with that experience. Unlike sympathy, it makes no assumptions about how the other person is feeling. And you're quoting Dr. Madeline Levine.
Yes.
And to me, that you can't be kind without empathy. I mean, I know empathy is part of your fundamentals of kindness, but without empathy, could you even begin to have all the other parts?
I think that you can develop empathy. And I think that we can teach empathy. And a lot of these other parts are part of the foundation of teaching it. Because if you don't feel what another person is feeling, if you don't experience or imagine what they're experiencing, it's hard to have that connection. But does that mean that you can't be kind? Does it mean that you shouldn't still show up? No. I think that each of us has the ability and capability. It's almost like along a continuum. And we're always learning and we're always trying to, to become more connected. So I do think that you can observe, because if you really watch closely and you allow yourself to have an open heart, and you're with someone, a parent or a teacher or a grandparent, who encourages you to don't be afraid to look and to feel what you feel, so that if you look and you see a person who's sleeping in the street, is it better to rustle by and distract your child? Or is it better to be able to take this in and then use that, age appropriately, of course, to talk about what's going on? Why are people sleeping in the street? Is there anything we can do? What must that feel like to not have a home to go to? What must that feel like to be cold in the winter? And gently engage someone so that they are able to try to approach an experience that may be challenging for them, scary, difficult, but yet you're guiding them, you're with them. And when you say, so, what might we do about that? Maybe we can bring blankets. Maybe we can go and talk to someone at the shelter and see what they need. And maybe we can address something that looks like it's overwhelming us. And I think when we do that, we are building empathy. We are training someone to enter another person's world at a pace that is tolerable for them. We're not shoving them in and having them be in shock. It's It's an approach that has to be right for that kid, that person. So that if you're asking your child to do a volunteer job, and maybe you were doing a volunteer job, and maybe your other daughter was doing a volunteer job at a particular place, but it doesn't work for this other child, my advice is don't force them to go there. That's not going to be good for them. Find what works for them and gently introduce them. So
Right.
that with empathy, it's a connection between the cognitive and the affective. It's the thinking and the feeling. So you can think about what the person might be experiencing, but you might not be able to feel it. It's when you're able to join that you then can really be present and say, how can I offer kindness? What is the kindness that I can offer that will be received well?
Oh, so important. But you will also note that sometimes it's difficult to be kind.
Yes, it
Even
is.
though, even though that, it gives us all these positive things, and there's so many literally good brain changing things that occur in your head, in your body when you are kind, that there's sometimes it's just difficult, but you should do it anyway. What do you mean by that? What's it, when is it difficult to be kind?
I think each of us has our own experiences of when it's difficult to be kind. I know it's sometimes more of a challenge for me when I'm exhausted and I don't have anything left. And it's like I say my personal reservoir is empty. And
Hmm.
so for me, it's important to keep filling my reservoir so that, if I find that there's a need, I have something to give. So I think what's important is to reflect internally and say, when is it hard for me to be kind? When I'm not feeling at my tip top shape, I might be more likely to bark at somebody if I am at my edge, right, about to go over, then stand back, breathe, and say, "Oh, this person's really having a hard time." I think it's hard when we are at our edge. I think it's hard when someone is unkind to us. I remember a dear friend sharing with me that her father was in the hospital and a nurse came in. And now remember, he was the patient. And a nurse came in and was really, she shouldn't have come to work that day because she really was not being as kind as one would hope a nurse would be.
Mm.
And this gentleman from his sick bed, as I recall the story, asked her to sit down and said, "Why don't you take a rest? It looks like you're having a hard day." and and he noticed. Now he could have changed that and thought, "Oh my goodness, this nurse is, why is she a nurse? She's terrible and she's mean and she's, sticking me hard," or whatever she's doing. But he was able to see what was going on with that person and with that nurse and offer kindness. And I think that when I say try it anyway, what I'm really asking people to do, and we are all human beings and we are all not at our best all the time. We're not the best mother, sister, whatever, all the time. But if we can try to understand that probably that person's having a really hard time, we might offer them a smile. We might offer them, "Wow, it looks like you're really at the edge," or "It looks like you've had a hard time," or don't say anything. Just wish them well and do whatever your business is. But I think sometimes when someone shows us their anger, their disappointment, their frustration, we're right there with our own. So
Hmm.
it's like it gets into this, and that isn't good for anybody. So understanding that each of us is probably not operating on all of our cylinders, particularly now during COVID and with everything that's going on, that we offer someone kindness even when they're not kind to us.
Right. That's sometimes very hard to do.
It is hard to
Right.
do. And I think we have to forgive ourselves. We have to also say, "Oh, I just don't have the energy," or "That person was really rude to me," or "How dare they say that?" And the kind thing to do would be, "Wait, I'm actually not going to let you talk to me like that." Really, we have to back up and start again. The kind thing is to take care of yourself, or the kind thing is to move away, or the kind thing, but we have to ask ourselves, what's the kind thing? And if we don't do the kind thing and we know the person, we can say, I am so sorry that I blew up at you. Or, when you blew up at me, I really felt terrible, right? That we can revisit it. I mean, this is a parent-child interaction all the time.
Right.
What do you mean you didn't pick up your stuff off the floor? I told you 5 times. Okay, we're not happy with not being kind. But what's really important is when we revisit the child and we say, I'm feeling better and I'm really sorry I scowled at you. I'm really sorry I lost my temper. That is what a child needs to learn about kindness, that we're all human, we all lose it. But
Right.
can we come back and say, I'm really sorry? I know it'll happen again. I hope it doesn't, but I'll try. Will you forgive me? And
Right.
that is respectful to a child. And if you want to have your child be respectful to you, start by being respectful to your child.
It's a two-way street all the time.
Yeah, it is. And it
And
shows empathy.
right. And and allowing someone to come back and express their regret perhaps at not having been their best self shows a great deal of tolerance, that understanding that people, not everyone is in their best space all the time.
It
um,
also may be that someone feels perfectly fine and warranted to speak to you in a certain way. They're
mm,
not going to apologize because they don't think they did anything that was wrong, but it was wrong for you. So then what is the kind thing? To approach them and say, I'd really like an apology, or which you may not get, or I just want you to know that I heard what you said. Sure would have liked to have heard it a different way, but I'm still feeling it and I'm having a hard time with that. Or you just let it go and you send them some prayers and you say, I hope that this person can find a way to deal with people differently. But I think what's important is to stay in the moment and to learn from it, because
mm,
we may not be able to change anyone at all, but we can change how we respond to people who deal with us in ways that are uncomfortable. We may understand them, we may make excuses, but we have to understand what is the kind thing to do for ourselves. Maybe we just have to say, whoa, this person's on a rant now. I'm going to excuse myself and come back in 10 minutes.
right. Right. It's challenging. And in your book you give some really concrete examples, like the format of the book. There are sections to read, there are sections for parents to read with children, separate
Yes.
sections for children, for the younger person to read, of assuming that they are of reading age, and some real stories. And then there's also a part of the book that's a workbook. And do you recommend that people literally write down their responses to some of the answers that are the questions that are posed? Rather, should they write? Does actually sitting down and writing them down make them more concrete?
Yes, for a number of reasons. We'd like people to sit down and be thoughtful about what these questions are. And sometimes what we remember at one time may not be what we remember another time. So with the question, who was kind to you, we may remember one person today. And then when we're asked the question a week from now, or we read it again in next month, that person may come to mind, but someone else may come to mind. And the reason they come to mind has probably more to do with where we are at this moment than where they were at the moment they were kind to us. And by that, I mean, we recall people who were kind to us in ways they were kind when we need a certain kind of kindness. So I remember this particular person because she always listened to me. And maybe at this moment, I'm not being heard. Or I remember a person who always looked so happy to see me, because maybe when I was with somebody, they kind of didn't even acknowledge when I walked in the room. The reason I think it's important to write it down is because it's about self-reflection, and it gives us a chance to number one, re-experience the kindness, which is wonderful, wonderful to recall the kindness of someone in our lives. and to recall how we felt when we were kind to people, but also to learn from it and to say, how can I give myself that kindness, or how can I be kind in that way to another person? Because as you said, it is a workbook, and the work is internal, and the work is also within our family and within the our colleague world, and just with the people we see in the market. And the work has to be done in order to say, wow, I think that I'm learning from this. Just as when we suggest that people, and I really do suggest this, that people write down what they're grateful for. We can think of the 3 things that I'm grateful for from today, but when we write it down, we really have this complete engagement with our whole body. And we're writing and we're reading and we're thinking about it and we're feeling it. And then the next day, we read it again and we say, oh yeah, I really was grateful for that yesterday. What am I grateful for today? And before you know it, you are accumulating not only things and occurrences, but memories of gratitude. And one of the things that's very effective with teenagers in particular, to have them be grateful and generous, is to ask them, the teenagers who often think the world is just about them, to ask them to keep track of what they're grateful for and to write it down and to read what some people have come to call gratitude journals. And somehow there is a link between, particularly with teenagers, of recognizing what they're grateful for and acknowledging it and paying attention to it and how generous they are. And as I said, to your first question, when you asked, why did we write the book? We were noticing a decline in empathy in young people. We were noticing a rise in bullying, in disrespectful behavior. So one of the things that we hoped would happen, and the science is proving this out, the research is showing this, that we physically, mentally, and emotionally and spiritually change when we are kind, when we receive kindness, when we offer kindness, and when we recognize what we are grateful for, what we have, and we look at what we have and focus on that. It's not that we don't notice what we don't have, but we decide to pay attention to what we have, which helps us deal with loss.
Right. Also important. I just want to mention, because I realized I didn't at the top of the program, if people have questions, to please put them in the chat. Dale and I are going to speak for a few more moments, and then we will leave time for questions at the end. So please feel free to populate the chat. But Dale, you mentioned bullying and disrespect, and in the context particularly of teenagers, which immediately makes my brain click to social media. And social media is we can't live without it, but it might really be causing a decline in empathy and kindness. And how have you dealt with that with perhaps your teenage patients or grandchildren or relatives? I mean, bullying on social media has we've known just some terrible cases that we've heard about in mass media of people who have unfortunately been bullied to death on social media.
And they are true, and they are rising. COVID didn't help that. And I think that just as there are great problems with social media for kids, there's also possibility for great refuge for kids on social media. And what I mean by that is kids who feel different and who have felt ostracized, they can find like-minded kids in social media groups. They can find support more often, sadly, as we know, and it's almost become a cliche to say this, but it is true, that there is no safe place. Because, when I was a kid, if anybody was bullying me, I could get home, close the door, and that would be the end of it, and I would feel safe. with everyone having their smartphones and their tablets and their computers on, and kids on them literally morning, noon, and night. Often the first thing they check in the morning, the last thing before they go to bed, is their social media feeds. You can be, as you said, bullied to death, or you could be bullied, or you could be talked about, or you could be excluded. And often it's anonymous. So then you go to school the next day and you don't know who was saying these terrible things about you. And you don't feel confident, you don't feel safe. And so I think what's important is for parents to monitor their kids' social media feeds, and to, at the drop of it, to bring it to the attention of schools and communities, but also to limit the kinds of social media engagement that kids are having that can be so destructive. There are ways to do that. That's a whole other workshop. But the other thing is to talk to your kids and to talk to your grandkids and to see the kinds of things that people are posting and what they're posting about. When we talk about role models, we also talk about positive role models. There are some terrible role models, but there are also positive role models, and to encourage kids to be engaged with, through social media, with becoming involved with volunteer organizations. I mean, just to use the news right now, there are so many young people who are rallying and packing, hygiene kits and gathering blankets and children's toys to go for refugees, and I think that they're coming together to do these kinds of things that are very positive and very helpful and help build their sense of purpose and meaning. And when we find that our kids are kind of in that gray area where, they go on social media and then you look at them and they're not looking like they're feeling so great, engage them and talk about what's going on. Let's have a conversation. What's happening? You look like you saw something that was disturbing or that might have been hurtful. And you can't start that conversation when you're 14. When your kid's 14, this is the way you talk to your kids. It's kind of like people say, well, when do you start talking about sex? It's, what do you mean? You talk about a child's body, you talk about, what's going on in the world. Everything is age appropriate, but I feel that there should be nothing that's off limits, and that you are accessible to your kid. Parents who are accessible to their kids are open. They may have questions, which they ask or don't ask at a particular time, but they listen and they try to be as non-judgmental as possible. Because my experience with kids is that they'll kind of tell you a little bit, see how you respond. And if you don't respond so well, they're not telling you the rest of it. And I think what's important is, when we're talking about social media and kids, that there are certain things that they need to learn about how to keep themselves safe. And the more lonely kids are, the more at risk they are for engaging with people online who are bad actors and who might tend towards kind of gathering them into their lair. And it's very challenging. But to your specific point, I think that social media can be helpful. I think it needs to be contained. I think we need to know what's going on, what sites are our kids going to, who they're talking to, what are they talking about. And if we notice that our kids are engaged with excluding other children, or being mean or disrespectful, that we are on top of them, and that we absolutely say, this is unacceptable. This is not who we are. This is not what our family stands for. This is not okay. Even if everybody in the school is, excluding a kid. No, it's not okay. It's not who we are.
Right.
And
It's
so,
yeah.
go
Go
on.
ahead. No, go ahead.
I think it's a parent's role and responsibility to engage in also behavior that they'd like their kids to model. So if we're busy gossiping about people and, using pejorative language, it's going to be awfully hard to turn around and say, well, that's really not a nice thing to do. So again, it's all about reflection, and it's all about, who are we? None of us is perfect, but how do we want to grow? How do we want to be walking a path of kindness? What does it look like? If someone starts talking to you about someone, say, I'm not interested in hearing that. And you don't have to put a person down. Say, I don't think that's helpful. I'd rather talk about this.
Right. It's
But
part
each
of
of us
like,
has to draw our line in the sand.
right. It's to, not being a bystander, but being an upstander.
An upstander and an ally. Yeah, all of that language that, among other groups, ADL has been teaching us for years, right? That
Mhm.
when you're witnessing, you have a responsibility. And with our children, we can hear what they felt when they were unable to say something in defense of another kid, right? And we can say, well, what got in the way? That's understandable. How might you like to do it next time if there's a next time? Or what would you have wanted someone to say to you? It's the golden rule. What would you
Mhm.
have wanted someone to have done if you were in that position? When we watch a movie or read a book with a kid, just stop and say, how do you think that kid feels? Why do you think they're in that position? What would you do if you were their friend? So
Right.
it's one removed, but it's still relatable.
So true. You actually, and also speaking of books, your book has a number, like a bibliography of sorts of great
Yes.
books to read with kids. Do you have a particular favorite?
The book is a little dated now, and they were all favorites. But there are many more books coming out now, and with so many schools deciding what can and cannot be read, I think
Yeah.
what's really important is for parents to read books with kids about kids who may be different from them, different from the families, so that they can learn about other kids and other cultures and other ways of living and choices. And I think it's really important to be able to expand kids' knowledge of other people, other children, so that they're not afraid, so that they have some familiarity. And depending on what it is you're looking for, like if you want to try and help your child understand about a grandparent who's got Alzheimer's, Annie and the old one. I mean, there are just so many. Or somebody, how do you talk about death? If your friend died and you want to be there for the family, how do you prepare your child? What book might you read with them, or what story might you tell? Um, if you want to talk about, the animals that are not cared for, thank goodness there's a book for almost everything and anything.
Yeah.
But the idea is, how do you read it with them, or how do you discuss it with them, right?
Right.
And there are lots of books that can nurture the idea of kindness and nurture the idea of being respectful to someone who's different, or to include someone who's different from you.
A very good point. One other point that you mention in the fundamentals of kindness is the idea of relaxation. And I'm not sure everyone would immediately think of that as a fundamental of kindness, but why is it so important?
To me, it's important because when we relax, we allow ourselves to just be. And to relax, number one, to breathe, to kind of center ourselves and ground ourselves, and just see where we are in the space, in the world. All these things are happening. Wait a minute, what am I really feeling right now? But also to relax by being in nature, and to watch a funny movie, and to talk to a really good friend, and to play with your pet, and to arrange some flowers, or to whatever, walk in your garden. I know that your garden is very
Yes, we were
important to
talking
you.
about
and
that.
and to notice the shoots that are coming up, and to watch the birds, whatever helps you to relax, and to make that a priority, because that is self-kindness. And if you feel, as I said early on, that your reservoir is full, you'll be much more willing to and able to do the kind thing, to notice, because you're not just feeling deprived and and empty. You're looking and you notice that somebody over there might need a hand, or that person's struggling. So you go and then you make eye contact with them and you have a connection. And or you smile at someone. But if you're empty, you can't do it. Or if you
Right.
do it, it comes off as inauthentic. But why wouldn't we want to nurture ourselves? Why wouldn't we need to take care of ourselves? We're all taking care of so many people, and we're all taking care of so many things, and we're all worried about what's the next COVID news and what's the next war news. And we need to be able to relax a bit. And some of us don't feel we have the right to relax,
Mm-hmm.
particularly caregivers. It's really
Right.
important that when we are caregiving as our primary role, that we take time to take it easy and to step back. And we
And
want children to relax because children need to be able, at the end of the day, to do a breathing exercise, to do a visualization, to get a good night's sleep, and to feel prepared for the next day, and to start afresh, and to feel that wonderful feeling of comfort and peace and safety. And they can do it with their favorite book, with music, with stories, with cuddles.
mm-hmm.
And I don't think they should do it with social media.
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with you there. Just reminding people if they have questions to please put them in the chat. But I just find it so interesting when we call relaxation a form of self-kindness, because I think very often we do forget that you need to take care of yourself, and doing it is a form of kindness to yourself. It's not just being lazy. It's
Some
absolutely
people,
necessary.
yeah, Sharon, some people only relax when they don't feel well. And I think that if we relax more, we probably feel better more.
Hmm.
and and just giving ourselves permission, you know, we don't have to lie down because our back aches. We can lie down because we need to lie down for a few minutes. And
Right.
we can read a couple of poems that really inspire us just because that would make us feel good. And I think in order for each of us to really understand what it means to be kind to others, we need to be kind to ourselves. I mean, our bodies tell us, our bodies show us. We get the helper's high when we help somebody else. We feel better. And our blood pressure generally will be lower. Our attitude will feel more competent, more confident. We'll have a more joyful approach. Why wouldn't we want to do that? And we can do that, by taking a few moments each day and taking some deep breaths and taking a moment when you walk by a flower store to stop and look at the flowers, if that's what will bring you a bit of joy.
Right. Right, right. And one other thing I noted is, keeping track of your kindness. I mean, I guess you could
Yes.
keep track of kindness to yourself, but you actually say that research shows that those who keep track of their own acts of kindness towards others are more likely to be grateful and happier to more acts of kindness. I
Yes,
think I got that right.
you did get that right.
Um, so Yeah, so really we should, you talked about a gratitude journal, but this would be sort of a what I did nice, what kind thing I did today sort of journal.
Right. And it's not like, oh, look at me, look how kind I am, and look how many things I did. But what it is being able to recognize what you felt and how you felt when you did that. And it's interesting because it's sometimes it will reveal something, so that let's say you pick up some trash that you've seen, oh, I'm going to clean up the park, right? And they say, and then you find that you're also angry that people aren't cleaning up their trash. So how come I have to clean up the trash? So I think be aware of the
Mm,
feelings that you have. But other examples have to do with, if you want to be a kind person, and I think most of us do, I'd like to think all of us do, um, what does that mean? Well, in our tradition, in the Jewish tradition, what is a tzaddik? A tzaddik is the highest, the highest form of goodness in a person, and a tzaddik is a person who does good deeds and is kind. And we look up to these people, and they can be our role models, and we can be that person. And then when you think of yourself as this person, you will continue to want to be that person. So it will inform the way you live your life, and you will feel well, you will feel connected, you will feel as if you are a social being. And I think what's important is to pay attention and also to share. As I said before, if you're on the phone and it's your friend, if you're late because you helped someone and someone's waiting there looking at their watch, you say, I know I'm late, I'm really sorry, but it was important for me to do this. And this is what happened. And this is how I felt about it. I was so happy. I remember when someone stopped for me when I had a flat tire, right? And I know what that felt like. So I think that when we recall the kind acts, particularly for children, I mean, we recommend that you have a kindness chart. And you say, who was kind to you and who were you kind to? What did you do? And when we do programs in schools, this is one of the most important activities that the kids sit around with the teacher and they really talk about their kind acts and the kind acts in the school for each other, how they deal with each other, and they recognize it. And they, again, yes, the kids who got hundreds on the tests are also recognized, but the kids who helped reorganize the chairs because somebody couldn't sit down and was excluded, they're recognized. And we pay attention to kindness. That's the point.
Right. Right. It's so important. I'm thinking of like bulletin boards in school. It's not just the kids who got 100% on the spelling test whose tests need to be up there. There needs to be a bulletin board that says who did what kind things were done to, by each person to other people. And let
And
that
how
be
did that make
celebrated.
you feel? And somebody might say embarrassed. Somebody might say, I don't know. But the more you talk about it, the more comfortable kids get.
Yes.
And I'm so happy to say that there are kindness curricula now in schools, and there to try to understand, whatever is age appropriate, what you can do to be kind. What does
Right.
kindness look like in this classroom? What does kindness look like in our school? What does it look like in our community? What does it look like in our religious organization? What is kindness? In our community, kindness is beginning to look more inclusive because, if you have people in your congregation who don't hear so well, then we need to have captions, or we need to have sign language interpreters. And then you find out, which is so interesting, that, wow, even people who hear will like those captions because sometimes it's just easier to read, and it's a reinforcer. It's kind of like, when curbs, when there were, what if there's a name for them, where wheelchairs can go on over the curb, and there's a curb cut. When curb cuts happened because of wheelchairs, what was interesting was that all the baby carriages started going through the curb cuts,
Totally
right?
true.
So that we as a society benefit when we are aware, we notice, and we try to make changes from a place of kindness. And all of us benefit.
Right.
So this is why we wrote the book.
Right now, I mean, it will change the world. There's a question in the chat. Can little acts of kindness help us deal with the overwhelming violence in the world that we can't directly do anything about?
This is the most important question, and I'm so grateful for this person. There are so many faith traditions that at their very essence talk about helping one person, doing one kind act. In our faith tradition, we must do one kind act every day. We must find the person who needs that act. Why? Because if we all did that, the world would change. And we have a responsibility to make the world a better place. So these random acts of kindness that people talk about are the acts that make a difference. When you thank the person who gives you your coffee and you look in their face and you say, I waited for you because you make the best coffee. That is an act of kindness. You may be the only person who told that person that you appreciated how they treat you, right?
Mhm.
And that makes their day. When you tell a nurse in a doctor's office that you appreciate that she understood that you were a little bit nervous when you came in, that makes a difference. When you thank the person who bags your groceries, these make our world, our immediate world, better. When we sit and we try to send prayers to the people who are in the Ukraine, yes, I believe that energetically we are having an impact. Each of us is having an impact on each other. Our choice, whether we want to have a positive or a negative impact. So why not send positive thoughts to people who are in need of healing? We have prayers. We have healing prayers. Why do we do that? Because we
It
believe
makes a difference.
that it will make a difference. And I feel that we can make a difference with our small acts, and the world will become better. Because when we do that, we also have the energy to deal with the sadness and the terrors that are going on. We have to be strong enough to deal with it. You know, we can't immerse ourselves in the news because it's too much, but we have to be able to hear the news. We have to be able to pay attention and show up, but each of us has to decide by self-kindness when we listen, how much we listen, and then what we need to do to kind of bookend ourselves and protect ourselves.
So important. This is a really,
So thank you
really
for that
important
question.
message. Oh, thank you very much for it, and thank you for your answer. And with that, I just also want to say thank you so much for being with us this evening, and to all of everyone who was able to attend. This was a tremendous way to end our series,
Thank you.
Cultivating a Caring Soul. The Kindness Advantage is a wonderful book. If you haven't bought it yet, please do so. It's available on Amazon and bookstores. I think you will enjoy reading it and benefit from it. And I think the being kind only makes us better people, and it makes us, if we're better people, we make a better world. So thank you very much, Dale. I want to thank so much the chair of this entire program, Nancy Schulman, who has piloted these programs throughout the first quarter of this year. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you so much to everyone who participated, to Diane Sloyer, who was always behind all of these wonderful programs, to you, Dale, for being such a joy to work with.
Thank you.
And I wish everyone a wonderful spring. Purim is past us, but I wish you all a wonderful approach to Passover and a joyous holiday season as we are getting there, and hopefully in a different position than we were last
Yes.
year.
Yes.
Anyway,
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you all very, very much. This was fantastic. Have a wonderful evening. Safe
Bye.
travels. Take care.
Thank you. Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Bye.